What's up? So we're back for day 12 of the 28 days of Black History Month. I'm not going to, I get long-winded. I'm not gonna go into much, just in, I guess, the introduction. But yeah, tonight we're going to do a reading from the Black Book by Toni Morrison. Milton A. Harris with assistance of Morris Levitt, Roger Furman, and Ernest Smith, with the foreword and preface by Toni Morrison. The story that I wanted to focus on is based in the it's based in the Great Migration, and it basically covers like directly after slavery, when folks were just trying to find space, trying to figure things out and really build a life and explore their options and really figure out what they were going to do. And yeah, the story that I'm covering it centers around a Black American girl and her family and what life was like for them, and the struggles and things that they went through. Which, this book in itself, the Black Book, I'm really excited. I've been delving into it and just reading a lot of the articles and the stories. Features a lot of pictures and just different things from within the Black American culture within the past 500 years. Some of the things in this book just, again, blew my mind. I'm really happy that I purchased it when I did. I purchased it sometime last year, after Toni Morrison's passing. And I highly recommend you have it, especially if you have kids. I really think it would be just great to have around the house, for kids and adults alike, just to really get a grasp on our culture and just... in terms of the kids, just letting them know where we come from and who we are. I think just based on what they get in school, it doesn't do nearly enough, and it doesn't do anything really in terms of giving us our history and really empowering us and shining a light of just our journey, which is a magnificent one. I think this would be a great addition, just to have around the house for them, and it honestly is a gift that keeps on giving. And like I said, as adults, I'm very adamant about us really delving into it and being able to pass that information on and really, grasping what it meant, because there's so many lessons, and I mean, as you know, like, you never stop learning. But I think it's just it's definitely a necessary addition to have around the house. But this particular story I wanted to focus on, just given the, let's see, I'm gonna turn into it. Yeah, just given the conversation of like the Great Migration, because like we don't really talk about what that was like enough. And again, history always repeats itself. For me, I think about those times during when Katrina was happening and how hard folks had it. I knew folks who were hugely affected by the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and were displaced, and folks who had moved to North Carolina, folks who didn't have Social Security cards and ID because it got lost in the storm, and just really like suffering and struggling. And it puts me in the mind of these folks like really like scrambling around trying to figure things out, not really knowing where to turn, and everything being against them. It makes me even think of specifically Katrina. With Katrina, it makes me think of when folks were released from the enslavement of the 5 civilized tribes, Native American tribes who owned slaves, which is a whole other video within itself. But like just that kind of displacement and really scrummaging around trying to figure out the next move, and not really having anything to any real direction, anything to turn to, and just really having to play it by ear and take it day to day, inch by inch. I really wanted to delve into this story because of that. And again, you know, if you're not familiar with Toni Morrison's work, I highly recommend going down a YouTube rabbit hole. I highly recommend her interviews. I highly recommend her speech that she did in '75, which you can find on SoundCloud. Type in Toni Morrison 1975. I'm sure it'll come up. The Do Your Own Work speech, Do Your Work speech rather. Just a super influential woman, and just so prolific and just amazing. I saw her documentary, which just ironically came out just before her passing. And it was so mesmerizing. It was amazing. It was incredible. I highly recommend seeing that as well. I was first introduced to Toni Morrison back in the 90s with Beloved, child. And if you haven't seen Beloved, you are in for it. For those of you who know, what's understood don't need to be even said. Y'all, I'm not gonna spoil it. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it. But yeah, just a gem to our community, and just the idea of her creating this book, and just recognizing the necessity for us as Black Americans to understand where we come from, and understand our ancestors, and really being able to put ourselves in their shoes, and recognizing and acknowledging it, and understanding that, you know, you don't have a future unless you know your past. You don't have, until you understand your past and you're able to fully grasp where you come from, there's no way that you can step into the future. There's no way that you can walk that path that was laid for you. So yeah, I definitely recommend the Black Book, but I said I wasn't going to be long-winded, so I'm just going to jump in to the story. Yeah, so there's not really a title for it. It's just kind of here, but I'm just going to dive in. We were born on my father's farm near a little town in Alabama. It was a good farm. The soil was good, and my father loved growing things. He must have been a better farmer than a businessman, though, because there came a day when we heard the terrible words foreclosure and mortgage. In what seemed no time at all, we lost the farm and had to move to the city. We, who had always been so free and independent, found ourselves working as hired hands for other people. Ours was a large family. My oldest sister, a half-sister by my father's first wife, cooked in the big house. My mother and the two sisters, a little older than I, worked in the fields. I had to stay home and watch the three younger children. I was 8. The sister who cooked received $4 a week, and if her boss didn't want to pay cash, he sometimes paid her with syrup. My other two sisters tied radishes for a penny a bunch, and then at the end of the week, when we were to be paid, there was always some deduction for rent or some damage we had caused, real or imagined. My father could never get used to being ordered around, so one day he told my mother he was going to Pensacola, Florida, to try his luck. He had heard that things were much better there. If he were successful in finding a good job, he was to send for us. If not, he would return. Mr. V was very angry when my father didn't come to work. He threatened to put us out of the house, and I use the word house loosely. My mother pleaded with him, and he finally agreed to let us stay. But he was twice as mean. There was hardly any money now. Whatever Mr. V had too much of, that is what he paid us for our wages. But no matter what happened, when the school doors opened, those of us who were of school age were sent off to school. We had to walk miles to the nearest one, but we went. The school in Alabama was very crowded, and all of the grades were jumbled together. The teachers were untrained. However, with our reduced earning power, my mother's life was made miserable by Mr. V. He kept insisting that we children be taken out of school to help work out the rent bill, and my father had been gone weeks. Finally, one day, there was a letter with $20 in it. We were jubilant, but we were cautioned not to talk about it because even then, a plan was beginning to take shape in my mother's mind. She wrote my father that she did not want to go to Florida. She asked him to save carefully what he earned because she had decided to go north, where her children could be educated. She wanted something better for us than working in the fields as she was doing. There were long weeks when she heard nothing from my father. Mr. V was growing more insistent about taking her children out of school. She finally had to agree to take the older ones out. We had brought a few pieces of furniture with us from the farm. We had my dad's books, I remember. Gradually, things were disappearing. Somehow, my mother found ways of selling them. But she could do this only on a small scale so Mr. V would not get suspicious. We children did not know exactly what was happening, but we knew something momentous was about to happen. Then one day, she told us that soon we were all going on a trip, on a train. We were going north, but still there was no word from my father. Then she told us that she had written him that if he ever wanted to see us again, he had better be on number 4 when it came through G on a certain morning in November. Early that November morning, we were bundled up, 6 of us. My oldest sister was to stay until we sent for her. Not one of us was over 14. My mother had gotten someone with a wagon to come for us and our belongings. And with the greatest excitement I had ever known, we were on our way to the station. My father had not answered her letter, so with sinking hearts, we were afraid we would never see him again. We were finally all settled down in our seats. My nose tingled with that odor that only a train coach can give, and then we were moving. There were tears in my mother's eyes. She had made a big step. We know now that she hadn't even enough money to get out of Alabama, but she was going north of Alabama. She was going north of where we were. When her money ran out, she would work until she got enough to go a little further, but always north. Vague but determined, those were her plans. Courage was needed for that. The train conductor came through the car and called out the name of the next stop. At last we could stop, looking over our shoulders. Until then, we felt that any minute Mr. V would find out about us and we would have to go and get off the train. My seat was turned so that I faced the rear of the coach. The train rocked along. I was so excited I couldn't relax. And then the door of the coach opened, and there, coming up the aisle, swaying as trains make you do, was Papa. He had been on the train all the time, but waited until it was safe to look for us. Such crying and laughing and hugging and kissing. Later he told us how he knew Mom meant what she said, so he had gotten busy. He found out about large companies who would transport whole families to different sections of the country, and the wage earner could pay the company back for the transportation out of his wages, a little at a time. He had signed up with a coal mining company in Kentucky, but we had to lay over in Birmingham to complete the deal. While in Birmingham, we had one large hotel room. Our lunch was gone and money almost. There were a couple of anxious days of waiting, trying to keep 6 active, half-hungry kids quiet in one hotel room. Certainly must have been a job. Then we were in the train station, all huddled in the Negro section. There were other families like ours all waiting, not knowing what was in store for us, but it couldn't be any worse than what we had left. We were all hungry. After an eternity, several men came around with the largest baskets I have ever seen. They were full of the most glorious sandwiches. There was milk and coffee. And then on the train again, the farther we went, the colder it got. By the time we came to Kentucky, it was frigid. We who had never seen snow and had no adequate clothes suffered. The company furnished our meals all the way. Finally, we arrived at one of the dirtiest little towns I had ever seen. Coal dust covered the snow. We were assigned to one house in a row of identically ugly houses. One big potbelly stove heated the house. We were given commissionary books for groceries. The main thing that I remember about this little town is how cold we were, how dirty my dad was when he came home, the smell of carbide headlamps, and that I had a birthday on Christmas. A company man came by and placed a large box of chocolates on the porch of each family, my first taste of chocolate. For some reason, we didn't stay there very long. We moved to another town in Kentucky, which was much nicer. The men worked hard, and compared with what we had earned before, Papa made good money. It did not take too long to pay the company back. The Cumberland Mountains were all around us, but we were warm in the valley. I suppose it was a typical mining town. The people worked hard and played hard. They were friendly and took us right in. There was a school. It was much closer than the one in Alabama and had been, but the standards were worse. We had one teacher for all classes. When she reached the section of the arithmetic that called for long division, she could go no further. My sisters had learned long division, so she confided that she never learned it, and could they teach her how. When my mother inquired where she could send the children to get a better education, she was told that they would have to go over the mountain to Lexington. Of course, there were better white schools closer, but that was out of the question. Sending us over the mountain was also out of the question. My mother began planning again. She added to Papa's income by washing and ironing for single men, selling them lunches, and so forth. She was able to save money as never before, but she didn't like the cough my father was developing and the way his shoulders were beginning to look stooped all the time. But most of all, she saw no future for her children. She had a brother in Ohio. In his letters, he begged her to come to Ohio. It was God's country. About to turn the page, but I just want to show you this picture. This is the mother as she worked. Work was plentiful, schools were good and not segregated, but since Papa was working regularly and supporting his family for the first time since he lost his farm, he was not too anxious to go to something he wasn't sure about. But Mom persisted. She saved everything above basic necessities. She kept in close contact with her brother. He wrote finally that there was a new house next door to his and he had a job waiting for my father. So all of Papa's arguments crumbled, and once again we were on a train, and this time we were really going north. The day we arrived, our signals had gotten crossed, and there was no one to meet us. We knew nothing about the town, or cabs, or streetcars, so we walked. Mom, Papa, 6 children, and our luggage. My youngest brother had on some shoes that were too small, and he cried every step of the way. After literally hours of being lost, we did at last reach our destination. When we got over our weariness, we looked around us. So this was God's country. My uncle's and ours were the only 2 houses on the street. Ours was new. It was pretty nice, except the plumbing was outside. The job for Papa was watchman in a sewage disposal plant, which was not far enough away from our house. However, the wages weren't bad and the work was easy. But the exciting thing was the school. All those rooms and teachers, the books, they were so excited. So excited that it took us a while to realize that all was not sweetness and light. Being the second Negro family in the section of the city, there were many children there who had never seen any other Negroes. We created quite a diversion for them. They stared, giggled, and made us very self-conscious. That was in school. Outside, we were targets for all kinds of practical jokes. We were called all kinds of names. Of course, we were afraid. We were greatly outnumbered, and coming directly from the South, we didn't know how much fighting back we could do. Our cousins quickly briefed us. You are in the North now. You have to let them know you aren't afraid of them. If they call you names, call them names back. We were told what names we could make, what groups the angriest. There were many foreigners there who were just as new as we were. Many of them were much older than the American kids because of the language barrier which had kept them behind in school. We had never heard a foreigner talk, and they had seen few Negroes. And of course, the Americans were superior to all of us. Americans in quotes, I might add. There were fights every day. We were waylaid on the way home. Most of the teachers were wonderful, though. There were times when we were sent out of the room, and when we would return, we would feel a difference in the pupils, a kindness. We were asked to participate in their games and so forth. Some of the teachers, however, were as prejudiced as their students were. Sometimes they would actually call us names if we got into trouble. They didn't last long, though. How we learned anything, I don't know, but we did. We learned that you gained a certain amount of respect when you would fight back. We learned that all white people were not enemies. We learned that the best teachers may not always have the highest degree. I will never forget some of those teachers in that little Ohio town. Finally, though, we had to move on. Friction developed between our two families, and although we liked the racial differences in our school, we could not overcome the difference between the two families. We went from bad to worse. It was impossible to find decent housing for 7 children. My mother had a new baby and influenza simultaneously and never really got her strength back. Such managing would be quite a chore for anyone, but it would be even more so for a Negro. Some of the places where we had to live are a story all by themselves. I never want to think of them again. When we had reached a new low, someone told my dad about the company here that was transporting families and furnishing houses in a manner similar to the situation in Kentucky, except that it was in a steel town. Arrangements were made. We were given 4 rooms and an option on another 4 in the same building. It seemed like heaven compared to some of the holes in which we had lived. And the school, excellent. There were enough Negroes here so that although there were some unpleasantness, unpleasantnesses, that's what it says. We were not pioneers. My mother and father lived to see 6 of their children graduate from high school. Donnie Woods is who wrote this. You know, oftentimes we hear about the stories of the folks who stayed in the South. I'm so used to hearing those stories because I come from those people. My family is still there, as well as up north. I have obviously family who moved up north and out west and those things. But you rarely hear a lot of stories about the Great Migration. And, you know, although things were as crazy as they were in the South, America is still America. And I say the same thing about LA. I know people try and romanticize California to be like this utopia, but I've experienced more racism here than I have anywhere else. And I feel like, you know, there may, even during that time, have been this romanticization of like the North where, you know, granted, they did have a lot more freedoms and a lot more opportunities than they did down south or anywhere else, but it was still America, you know? Just thinking about how that's been that's consistently been the experience of Black Americans. You know, I come from a family where I come from a factory town. And just learning even the history about my town and how my family kind of ended up there, because like I know my family's not from the town that I'm from. They're still from North Carolina and South Carolina. They're just not from the town that I'm from. So just finding out how they came to be in that space. They came looking for work. There was a period in time where those furniture companies were starting up, and They were advertising and advertising new work and new opportunities and a new life, and they were seeking work, well-paying jobs. And what's interesting about that, just thinking about this story, years later, you know, folks had ended up being displaced because these companies ended up selling to China. So the work went overseas. People kind of were put on the spot, like they kind of just got noticed, like really short notice. So like they were scrummaging around trying to find work. It was a factory town, so like the town was literally like the majority of the people in the town worked at those factories. There wasn't much work outside of, if they went to work, which they ended up having to find other jobs in the surrounding areas. You're talking like hour commutes. You're talking just really making it tough on those folks. And you're talking about some folks, not everybody, but some folks didn't necessarily have like education. Some folks, they were very skilled at what they did. They've been doing this for like decades. They've been doing this work for a really long time. So they had those skills, but they didn't have the degrees. They didn't have the paper, which also made it tough. And they weren't necessarily paid out the way that they should have been. They really just weren't given a chance. They really wasn't given their due. They weren't treated like human beings, to be quite honest. Just thinking about some of the stories I heard about the treatment, and like, in that area there are like wealthier white families who, definitely played their part in all of those things. And, reading this story, it just makes me think about that, and it really connects it to our history here in this country. Because this stuff it doesn't stop. Like, history always ends up repeating itself, just like I mentioned before about Katrina in reference to this story, or, other events throughout history. Like, it's important to know. And just thinking about this coming from the perspective of Donnie Woods, who then was a child, and having to witness all of this stuff, you think about like these kids having to like grow up hella fast and really like really adapt to all of these varied situations in such a short amount of time, and really having to make do with everything that they had, and really having to just be mindful of just their environment, and be mindful of all these different factors, and really trust in their family, which, I'm sure the parents, as our parents do, I feel like Black American families fight tooth and nail to make sure that our children have everything that they need, to make sure that our children are able to be kids. And I can just only imagine like what it must have been like for those kids. Talking to my grandparents, and really understanding their stories, I can kind of, obviously they weren't, enslaved. I know my grandmother on my dad's side, they definitely picked cotton and were like sharecropping and stuff like that, working in houses, but in like the 50s and 60s. But, just talking to them and just hearing how hard it was for them, but also just how resilient, just how resilient they were, and just how my grandma just made shit work, and how the community came together, and how, we looked out for each other, and, we might not have had everything, but, we pieced it all together, and we helped each other, and, what was mine was yours, and what was yours was mine, and, we weren't letting each other go hungry. We weren't letting each other go without. We did what we could for one another, and, as they mentioned in the book, you know what I mean? the family reaching out, letting them know, come here, this is where it's at, this is where you need to be, doing what they can, you know, and just how amazing it was of the father to just make such a hard decision to like leave his family in such hard situations on the chance of hoping to do better. Obviously, you know, with the intention of coming back if it didn't work out, but, you know, busting his ass to go to Florida and to make the money to send to his family and to try and create a life. And the mom, you know, as black mothers are, super resilient, super, you know, just holding the family down, and making those harsh decisions and really, really being the supporting her husband, but also holding her family down and being the brains of the outfit and making sure that the shit, you know, worked, that her kids had at the end of the day. That her kids had what they need, that her kids had a chance at a future. You know, as always, education has been at the forefront of our community, you know, and just thinking about the attacks, as they mentioned in the story, just the attacks on our community in terms of education, and just how they've always tried to make it so that we could not have education, literally outlawing it at one point, multiple times throughout history even. Yeah, it blows my mind. I feel like I'm saying that so much during this series, but like truly, processing this stuff, it leaves my brain just kind of like shook, because I'm grateful. I couldn't imagine. I really could not imagine, and I'm thankful because they paved the way for us. You know, we wouldn't be where as I said before, we would not be where we are without them. And, you know, every chance we get, we have to honor that, and we have to honor our ancestors. As I said before, I highly recommend this book. It's absolutely amazing. Definitely want to have around for sure. Especially if you have kids. And, you know, with that being said, I've had conversations in the past with like friends who have kids, you know, my sister and like my cousins and, you know, my god kid's mom. Like, we've had conversations about, you know, when's the best time to like teach your kids about this stuff and about our history and all of those things, and what's appropriate for, you know, what time, and like, in my opinion, you know, in the world that we live in, I feel like, you know, the sooner the better. To each his own. I'm not about telling anybody how to raise their kids, but, you know, of course you don't want to give them all the gruesome stuff, you know. You want to do it, you know, gradually, but at the same time, you know, we live in a world where things are changing every day, and we have to prepare our kids. But also just giving them that, because, you know, our history isn't all doom and gloom. Like, we're magnificent people, and like I wish I had this stuff when I was young. You know what I mean? I mean, I definitely did, like in bits and pieces, but, you know, obviously with the education system we have in America, like, we definitely didn't get the truth 100% of the time. And even with, you know, what's interesting about our culture is like a lot of our history and a lot of the things that we pass on, we usually pass it on orally. So, you know, again, it could easily be missed, and none of this should go missed. It's so necessary for it to continue to be passed along, and that's what I appreciate about Toni Morrison writing this book, because she got it. she got it and she understood how necessary it was. And yeah, with that being said, I highly recommend it. I definitely, like I said, I highly recommend going down that Toni Morrison rabbit hole. Definitely check out her Do Your Work speech in 75, which was recommended by an influencer that I love. And yeah, just dive in, man. Such a magnificent work, and just we're magnificent people. Like I said, we're walking miracles, man, and I think we should just celebrate that every chance we can get. That being said, I am about to go on about my business, enjoy the rest of my night, and knock out. I hope you guys do the same. And this is day 12, y'all. We still going. I'll be back in tomorrow. I got some really dope things planned for you guys. And yeah, I hope to see you then. Peace.